State Police Boston recorded an emergency 510.
My wife's been shot. I've been shot.
Where is this, sir?
I have no idea. I'm off. I was just coming from Tremont, Brigham and Women's Hospital.
Pull right up. Take care of my wife.
Yeah, we're coming and people taking care of her.
Pressure mounted to find the black man Carol Stuart had described as having robbed and then shot him and his pregnant wife.
The following video contains graphic and disturbing content which may be upsetting for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. In 1977, 18-year-old Carol Ann DeMady was excited about her recent promotion at work. She was now a waitress at the Driftwood, a restaurant in Revere, Massachusetts. Her father worked nights at the bar there, and he had gotten her a job as a busgirl when she was 15. She worked full-time every summer and a few days a week during the school year. She had aspirations of becoming a teacher, so she was saving up to help pay for college. By the next year, she had nearly $10,000 in her bank account, and she enrolled in Boston College. It was a little far from her home in the suburbs, but she enjoyed the newfound freedom of college life. She had everything all planned out: become a teacher, marry her high school sweetheart Jeff, and become a mother. Chuck Stewart was a short-order cook at the Driftwood that year. Growing up in a rougher, blue-collar neighborhood, he didn't go to college. He went to vocational school to learn to be a chef, wanting to achieve his own dream of owning a restaurant. He didn't want to be like the other guys in the neighborhood, working as a truck driver or in construction. He was better than that. He didn't want to be like his brothers, who were blindly following the expected path of the working-class Irishman. Nice suits, expensive cars. Unlike those guys, he had higher aspirations. He moved out of the area as soon as he saved up enough for the deposit and first month's rent. Chuck fell for Carol right away and knew that he needed to impress her to successfully steal her away from her boyfriend. He told everyone he had dropped out of Brown University due to an injury that caused him to lose his football scholarship. Surprisingly, no one ever questioned it, even though Brown University, an Ivy League school, doesn't offer scholarships. Even Carol never asked, and her boyfriend Jeff was attending Brown University. Chuck just slowly worked his way into Carol's life. He made sure to turn on the charm, going out of his way to help her when she was on shift. Eventually, she broke up with her boyfriend. He was all the way at college, and Chuck was right there. He was so attentive, always sending her flowers and calling her when he said he would. Carol's father didn't think he was good enough for his daughter, but Chuck didn't let that get in his way, and Carol eventually fell head over heels in love. Carol abruptly changed her major in college and decided she wanted to be a lawyer. She planned on continuing her education, and Chuck knew he couldn't keep working in a kitchen and daydreaming of owning a restaurant, so he started looking for a better job. He bought some educational programs on cassette tapes, one in business management and the other to help him lose the rough Boston accent. He didn't want people thinking he was part of the working class after all. He became a sales manager at a furrier and was very successful, making $40,000 a year. By the time Carol was in law school, he was up to $50,000. That would be a six-figure salary in today's money. In 1983, on Christmas Eve, Chuck took Carol to a very fancy, very expensive restaurant and gave her a Gucci wallet as a present. When she opened it, she found Chuck on one knee and a huge engagement ring inside the wallet. She said yes without hesitation. Carol's father had resigned himself to their relationship. If he made her happy, then that was all that counted. They planned an October wedding in 2 years' time, after Carol graduated law school. She graduated with the highest honors and landed a job with an accounting firm right away. She would take the CPA exam and begin to prepare for a career in tax law. Her starting salary was the equivalent of $85,000 a year. They quickly bought a duplex in the suburbs of Medford, where Carol grew up. The wedding took place on October 14, 1985, followed by a honeymoon in Paradise Island in the Bahamas. Chuck got Carol a fancy new car that came equipped with a car phone. Back then, that was some high roller stuff. He always wanted her to be available if he called, and check in with him when she was out. He never outright forbid her from going out, so the frequent check-ins didn't really raise any red flags. Carol thought it was cute. Her friends thought it was a little over the top, but not like it was outright jealousy or anything. Carol got a new position at a tax law firm, and Chuck was promoted to general manager. They had a perfect life, almost. Carol wanted that one missing piece. She had always wanted a family. They had moved out of the duplex to a single-family home, but Chuck still wanted to wait a couple more years. He hadn't given up on his dream of owning a restaurant. He had gained valuable management experience and was thinking about taking adult education classes in restaurant management. Once he got it off the ground, then they could think about a family. But his meticulous plan was disrupted when Carol announced she was pregnant. Chuck was not thrilled. Carol was on birth control, and she usually never forgot her pill. He asked Carol to terminate the pregnancy, but she refused. She was 30 now, and the clock was ticking. They had a house and great jobs, so why not now? After a few days of brooding, he decided to revise his previous plan. He enrolled in the class as he had planned, and to Carol's surprise, even started telling people about the upcoming baby. He also started to take out additional life insurance policies. That's not unusual for a growing family, but Chuck had a new plan in place for his life. Carol and a baby were not part of it. Chuck had a weekly boys' night out at the bar in his old neighborhood, where he would see his brothers and his old high school buddies. He drank his beer and scowled, thinking about the hot young blonde girl who recently started working at the office. And here he was, stuck with a wife and a baby on the way. Carol had even hinted about giving up her job to be a stay-at-home mom. He would be like every other man with a wife and 2.5 kids. This was not what Chuck had envisioned for himself. He deserved more. His friend asked him what was wrong. He took the opportunity to vent, moaning about his future life that would be a carbon copy of everyone else's. When Chuck turned to his friend and said, "I hope she gets hit by a fucking truck," he didn't take Chuck literally. When Chuck mentioned the life insurance money, he laughed afterwards, so his friend just chalked it up to the alcohol and didn't think about it again. But Chuck wasn't drunk, and he wasn't kidding. Chuck would approach his brother Mike and another friend with the same proposition, but he backed off when he saw that they were not receptive, laughing it off, telling them he was just bullshitting. When he approached his brother Matthew, he presented the plan as an insurance scam. Chuck would have the daily bank deposit from work, and Matthew would meet him at an agreed location. He would give Matthew the bag with the money, his gold watch, and his and Carol's wedding jewelry. Chuck would then report that he and Carol were robbed, collecting the insurance money. He offered Matthew $10,000, and they made plans for the meeting on Monday, October 29th, 1989. But Matthew didn't know about the half-loaded .38 revolver that Chuck had taken from the safe at work. Carol was pleasantly surprised when Chuck had agreed to attend birthing classes with her at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. It was a little far from home and in the middle of the city, but it was a teaching hospital for Harvard, and it had the best maternity ward around. It was just on the border of the so-called wrong side of town, but nothing bad would happen at the hospital, Carol thought. Chuck had been noticing the headlines in the newspapers recently about the crime wave that was plaguing the inner city. There had been a string of gang-related murders in the past month, and the violence was highlighted on the front page of the Globe and the Herald nearly every day. As far as he was concerned, that kind of stuff only happened in the black neighborhoods, something that fit into his plan perfectly. On the way home from the birthing class, Carol thought it was a little weird when Chuck seemed to take a wrong turn near the highway entrance ramp. But he could just turn around on a side street and they would be heading home soon. She must have thought it was very strange when Chuck stopped the car on a deserted side street near a vacant lot. And when Chuck reached into the back seat, opened a gym bag, and took out a .38 revolver, her thoughts turned to horror. He pointed it at Carol's face. To make it more believable, he fired the second round into the roof of the car on the driver's side. The third round was for himself. He hadn't planned on needing more than 3 rounds, but Carol was still moving. He got out of the car and threw Carol's keys as hard as he could into the night. When he got back in the car and took out his own set of keys, Carol had stopped moving but was still making small noises. The street was deserted. The sound of gunfire wasn't unusual around there. He took a deep breath and prepared himself for the third round. He had researched the exact angle where all vital organs would be missed, and while the entrance wound in his abdomen would look bad, he would have a clean exit wound right through the fat of the butt cheek. Just as he was about to fire, Carol lunged at him and his arm moved, causing the angle to be all wrong. Chuck felt an intense burning and knew that he had missed very, very badly. Through the pain, he reached over Carol and pushed her seat back as flat as it would go. Being 7 months pregnant, Carol's hands and feet were swollen, so it was a little hard to get the rings off of her fingers. He gathered the cash and jewelry, put it into the gym bag, and drove towards the meeting place he had arranged with Matthew. As planned, Chuck threw the bag through the open back window of Matthew's car and drove away quickly. He then used the car phone to call for help. Carol had stopped making any noises at all. Chuck knew if he didn't get to a hospital soon, he'd die, and all of this would have been for nothing. He told the officer on the phone he'd been forced at gunpoint to drive to a vacant lot, and he wasn't sure where he was. The man had shot him and his wife, then ran away. The officer relied on his training to keep Chuck conscious and get as much information as he could to help first responders locate him.
Is your wife being shot as well? Yes. In the head. In the head? Yeah, I touched on. Is your wife breathing? Just here, gurgling. There's a big street up ahead. Oh, man. I'm blanking out. You can't blank out on me. I need you, man. Yeah, move. Oh, God. Where were you shot, Chucky? Chuck? Chuck, can you hear me, Chuck?
12 minutes later, police cars and ambulances surrounded the scene. As they pulled Carol out of the car, an officer shouted, "Oh my God, she's pregnant." As Chuck was being put into an ambulance, he said,
Take care of my wife.
Yeah, please tell me that people taking care of her.
Carol would be taken to the same hospital her and Chuck had just left. She was placed on life support and would undergo an emergency C-section in an attempt to save the baby's life. Sadly, she passed away, but miraculously, the baby boy survived. However, the doctors were very worried about the length of time the baby was without oxygen. Little Christopher Stuart was rushed to the NICU, fighting for his life. Meanwhile, in the ambulance, a different drama was playing out, a reality TV drama. The CBS show Rescue 911 happened to be doing ride-alongs with Boston Emergency Services. The 911 call, the rescue, and the story Chuck Stuart would tell would be thrust into the national spotlight. A black male, black running suit, red stripes, shot him, shot his wife. He ducked. The national news media was all over it. An all-American couple gunned down violently in an urban jungle, a symbol of the carnage on the streets of Boston. A reward for the arrest of the killer was started at $10,000 and would only get higher. A tip line was set up, and no expense was spared in the manhunt. The authorities had no idea they were chasing a ghost. Every day in the United States, the lives of at least 4 women are ended by intimate partner violence. Everyone knows the first person the cops would look at in a case like this would be the partner. But the doctors said no way would Chuck have purposefully injured himself that bad. He was in surgery for 10 hours, and he had nearly died. No one really scrutinized Chuck's story. Quickly, all media inquiries went through the Stewart's family lawyer. Please give the family some privacy, he would say. Not unreasonable, given the situation. Carol's wake and funeral were filled with people wanting to pay their respects. And there were the camera crews ready to capture all the heart-wrenching scenes. Chuck's brothers, Michael and Matthew, were both pallbearers, and Chuck's friend Brian would read the eulogy that Chuck wrote. On November 9, 1989, baby Christopher would be taken off life support. The test showed no brain activity. He was simply without oxygen for too long. The medical examiner would rule his death a homicide. The pressure to find the man responsible for the brutal crime intensified. Boston police scoured the streets for a black man with a raspy voice in a black tracksuit. Suspicion turned to the local gang leaders and drug dealers, and the cops needed info from anyone who would talk. As a result, there were many cases of stop and frisk. Black men would report being strip-searched in the middle of the sidewalk. Those arrested on other charges would be questioned about any knowledge of the case. One man was held for 2 weeks due to the suspicion of his involvement in the crime. There was eventually a break in the case from a very unusual source. Not from the relentless questioning of the black men in the nearby housing complexes, but from the girlfriend of a city patrolman. Willie Bennett was a convicted felon, but despite this, his nephew Joey admired him. Willie's reputation on the street was good for Joey. No one messed with him. Joey and his friends were playing Nintendo and smoking a joint, and talk turned to the shooting. His friend Derek asked if Willie was involved, and Joey, wanting the street cred, said yeah, he was. Derek told Eric told his mom, and she told her boyfriend. But by that time, embellishments were added. Willie had told Joey all about it, showed him the gun and everything, even showed Joey how he shot the lady. It wasn't long before the young men were put into an interrogation room and gave statements. It was enough to get a warrant to search the 3 places where Willie was known to stay, his mother's and his 2 girlfriends. Willie had a warrant for a motor vehicle offense and was arrested while the police executed the searches. They didn't find any money, jewelry, or a firearm, but they did find a single piece of .38 caliber ammunition and a black tracksuit with white stripes. Close enough. Joey and his friends tried to recant their statements, but the cops wouldn't hear it. They threatened perjury charges on the young men. That would get you locked up for 20 years, they said. The Herald ran the story on the front page, naming Willie as the prime suspect. Willie was booked into jail on suspicion of an unrelated armed robbery, but in the court of public opinion, he was guilty of a heinous double murder. Chuck read the papers every day, so he knew exactly who to pick out of the police lineup. He pretended to be a little hesitant, just to make it seem more genuine. The cops had their guy, and the indictment would be officially handed down right after the holidays. The cops didn't follow up on the rumor about the truck driver who said Chuck was looking for a hitman. They didn't agree with black community leaders who said things about this crime just didn't add up. When Chuck's brother Matthew looked in the gym bag his brother had thrown through the window, he knew he was in some deep shit. His brother had never said anything about a gun. When he turned on the news later that night, his fears were confirmed. A shooting in Mission Hill has left a man critically injured and his pregnant wife on life support. Matthew called his longtime friend John, and they decided to ditch the gun immediately. They drove to an area where a railroad bridge crossed the Pines River, and John threw it as far as he could. During the next few weeks, Matthew tried as best as he could to pretend everything was normal as it could be in a family crisis like this. That meant going to see the baby in the hospital, visiting Chuck, and going to Carol's wake and funeral with the rest of the family. When they wanted Matthew to be a pallbearer, he couldn't say no. He went to work as expected, and to the bar with the guys on Friday nights. His mental state was chalked up to all the family stress, and everyone hoped his trip to California would help him clear his head. When he arrived back home, his mind was made up. Matthew hadn't come to a decision completely alone. He had confessed to his girlfriend pretty early on. She told her parents, and they put him in touch with their family lawyer. Attorney-client privilege meant the lawyer could not force Matthew to go to the police, but he did advise him to do exactly that. Some states exempt relatives from charges of harboring a fugitive, Massachusetts being one of them. The lawyer felt that Matthew could avoid a serious criminal charge due to this exemption. It was when Chuck positively identified an innocent man from a police lineup that Matthew told the lawyer he was ready. He would go to the district attorney and make a statement on Monday, January 1st, 1990. The siblings and their spouses were told, and they had to present a united front to break the news to their parents. They had information that implicated Chuck in the murder of his wife and baby. Chuck had been busy over the holidays. He was finally out of the hospital, and there were no more operations scheduled. His lawyer had been busy fast-tracking the life insurance settlements, so Chuck had a trip to Quebec planned and paid for. And he had just gotten a brand new Nissan Maxima. It was right after leaving the car dealership he discovered what was about to happen. The family lawyer had gotten the news on Tuesday, January 2nd, so when Chuck came to see him in the late afternoon of January 3rd, he told Chuck that he needed a criminal attorney. He was the Stuart family lawyer, not Chuck's lawyer, and he couldn't help Chuck any longer. When the police came looking for Chuck that night, he wasn't home. He had checked into a hotel across town. He had a wake-up call scheduled for 4:30 a.m. the next day, and a note written out on the hotel stationery. At 6 a.m. on January 4th, Chuck drove north on Route 93 towards the city of Boston and pulled over when he got to the middle of the Tobin Bridge. When the toll bridge workers saw the car a little later with its hood up, apparently broken down, they had to err on the side of caution. The bridge was 150 feet above the Mystic River, so they had to assume the worst. They might have a jumper. The note found on the car's dashboard confirmed their fear, so they sent the rescue boats out. Several hours later, the district attorney called a press conference with the police chief and the mayor. They told reporters about Matthew's statements and the recent developments, that Willie Bennett was cleared, Chuck was a suspect, and his abandoned car was found on the Tobin Bridge with a note on the dash. It was during this press conference that divers located the body of Chuck Stuart in the icy Mystic River.
Chuck Stuart was buried, and the governor wasn't there, and the mayor wasn't there.
2 years later, in 1992, Matthew Stuart and his friend John McMahon would face various charges for their roles in the slayings. Both would enter plea agreements to avoid a painful and lengthy trial. Matthew pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and 2 firearms charges. He was sentenced to 3 to 5 years. John McMahon pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact, conspiracy, and 2 firearm charges. He was sentenced to 1 year. John McMahon served his sentence and was released on parole. Matthew Stuart was released in 1995 and placed on probation. He was charged with violating probation 2 years later on drug charges, but they were dropped and he was released from probation a few months later. He struggled with addiction after his release and had trouble holding down a job, despite support from his family. On September 3, 2011, Matthew Stuart was found unresponsive in the bathroom of a homeless shelter. His death was ruled an accidental overdose of ethanol and cocaine. He left behind a 12-year-old daughter named Hope. Willie Bennett served 12 years in prison for armed robbery, which he maintains he did not commit. The evidence presented in this conviction was obtained during the execution of the search warrant in the Stuart case. He attempted an appeal based on these grounds, but was denied. He admits he was no angel, but that his reputation in the projects made him an easy scapegoat for the police. Only 4 years after the death of Chuck Stuart, the country was fooled again when a woman drowned her children and falsely accused a fictitious black man of carjacking and kidnapping. The This Is Monsters YouTube channel did a podcast about this story a couple of years ago. I'll link it in the description below. I was considering doing a video on this case as well. If that's something you're interested in seeing, let me know in the comments. When it comes to Matthew Stuart and John McMahon, it's been noted that once they found out about the firearm, they became aware they were involved in a murder and not just insurance fraud. Were they let off easy, or does the responsibility fall on Chuck alone? In his note, he never confessed or took responsibility for what happened. The Boston Police Department and the media have been criticized for their role in stoking racial tensions, quick to believe the story that the black guy did it, and dismiss any other theories. Leave a comment and let me know what you think about it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this case and found it interesting. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel for more true crime stories. As always, feel free to share your thoughts and feedback in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again, and be sure to join us next time as we explore the stories hidden within the wrinkles in crime.